First of all, you need a strong sense of good versus evil. I think fantasy really amplifies that. The most famous example would be The Lord of the Rings, and the good versus evil dynamic in that is very, very strong. And I feel like that's actually been lost in a lot of modern cinema. They've kind of blurred the line between good and evil and said it's all this gray area. But deep down, we're all made in the image of God. Whether we believe in Jesus or not, we are made in God's image, and there's no escaping that. So there's something in our being, because we're made in his image, that recognizes, no, some things are actually good and some things are actually evil. And
exclusive interviews, global voices, real stories.
My name is Wilson Hickman. I am originally from Arizona, actually, but recently I moved to Kentucky.
Okay. So can you share with us a bit about your journey as a storyteller? What first drew you to writing and then eventually filmmaking?
Okay, yeah, so my passion for creativity really stretches back into childhood. When I was a kid, I would write stories, and I mean literally write, like pick up a pencil and write, because I didn't know how to type yet. I would actually take paper with holes punched in the sides, and I would rubber band them together and make like my own miniature books and just scribble stories in them. And that expanded pretty quickly to writing chapter books when I was able to type. And I grew from writing books in my teen years to naturally progressing to want to write screenplays, because I've always been a huge fan of storytelling as a visual medium.
Yeah.
And fantasy was always one of my favorite genres. I grew up reading C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, watching the Narnia films, the Lord of the Rings films. And I love fantasy in particular as a genre because it has this ability to simultaneously transport us to this larger-than-life world where anything is possible. And yet at the same time, perhaps because of that, it's able to dive so deeply into the real-world struggle between good and evil in just such new levels of poignancy and clarity that you don't necessarily get in dramas that are set in the modern day. So... And I think for that reason, it has the power to not only inspire, but also to equip and encourage people to face struggles in the real world. And so and especially as a Christian, I love the ability to kind of stretch the mind through storytelling to imagine that our actions have much bigger consequences and much bigger significance than we could ever naturally see on this side of heaven. And so I love fantasy for that reason as well. And so I graduated from writing fantasy books to wanting to write a fantasy series. And that's how The Lost Healer came about. My process for getting an idea for The Lost Healer was, like most of my stories, it started with the characters. Because one of the things I love about storytelling is bringing characters to life. I feel like if the characters don't feel like real people, then the audience can't necessarily engage with them because they're just puppets of the screenwriter, so to speak, and they're not doing things that real people would do in those situations. So I started with the characters. Princess Kiva and Prince Rian are the two heroes of The Lost Healer. And I love telling stories about siblings because I'm very, very close with my sister. And so I got the idea for a prince and princess whose father died on this forbidden quest for a lost relic that can bring freedom to their land. And right after he was killed, their land was invaded by this empire. And now they've grown up without either of their parents. And Princess Kiva wants to finish the work their father started and bring freedom to their land, while the prince, with good intentions, is nevertheless compromising with their invaders because he thinks that's the only way to keep the peace. And so there's this love between the siblings, but there's also this tension as they have different ideas for how to bring peace back to their land. And that's the story, and we were blessed to make a proof of concept episode for that, and that's out now, and I'm really excited to see where God takes it.
Okay. So at what point did you realize storytelling was more than a hobby and actually your calling?
I don't know that I ever really thought it wasn't my calling, because
Yeah.
as I mentioned, you go back to my childhood as early as I can remember. I loved reading books, which quickly led me to writing books, which quickly led me to writing screenplays. And I will say that when I was getting to choose which college I was going to go to, I was actually considering a degree in theology because I'm very, very passionate about studying God's word and
Yeah.
following Jesus and getting to know more about his word and his teachings. So I thought to myself, in the sense of storytelling being just a hobby, it was like, well, I can do storytelling, but maybe my vocational pursuit will be in ministry, in theology, something of that nature. And
Yeah.
so I was looking for a theology degree, but I kind of felt God prompting me saying, hey, you can be a theologian and you can study my word and you can, listen to various pastors. You don't necessarily need to go to college for that, but you can also glorify me in the realm of storytelling. And entertainment has such a powerful ability to influence the culture, and I just feel that God is calling not only me, but more Christians in this generation to be excellent storytellers, where the storytelling isn't preachy, it isn't something that, only people who already agree with your beliefs could appreciate. It's just universally good storytelling that has the Christian worldview woven throughout it in an artistic way. And so if there was a point where I found storytelling to be my calling, it would probably be at that time in my life.
Okay, so do you find any difficulties trying to balance what you just said about making things entertaining while at the same time keeping your Christian beliefs within the programming that you're putting up?
I think the best way that I've found to balance the two is studying the Bible, oddly enough, which it really isn't that odd actually, because most of the Bible is historical narrative. It's not a list of commandments or a list of theological talking points. Most of the Bible is historical narrative, especially the Old Testament. And one of the things I've noticed as I've really studied the Old Testament is there are so many historical accounts that even though they're about real people who had real struggles and they were not intending to live their lives according to a certain pattern, you can look at their lives and see that twists and turns throughout their lives foreshadow Jesus. And it's artistic and it's beautiful, and you can see God's sovereign hand weaving it all together for his glory. But one of my favorite examples is the account of Joseph. So Joseph, from a young age, it's revealed to him by God that his brothers are going to bow down to him, but they all think that's ridiculous. And eventually, when he grows older, they betray him and they sell him into slavery, and he gets taken to this foreign land. And much as Jesus is betrayed by his own people because they don't want him to rule over them, they don't think he's really their Christ, their king. And then Joseph gets to that foreign land. He's thrown in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And there's two other prisoners there with him, just as Jesus is put on the cross for crimes he didn't commit, with two criminals on either side of him. One of the criminals gets saved, one of them dies. And then Joseph is resurrected, so to speak, by being brought out of the prison, and he saves the land from a famine. And then, just as God had predicted, his brothers do come and, in fact, bow down to him. And that's all real events. Joseph was a real man, really lived in Egypt. All that really happened.
My dad's
But
name, dad's name is
you
Joseph.
can see a theological term that's often used is types and shadows of Christ, all woven through it. And that's kind of the inspiration for my storytelling is, can I tell stories that feel like they're about real people and that have real emotions and, people making believable decisions throughout them, but weave types and shadows of Christ throughout it. And that's what The Lost Healer is.
Yeah, the funny thing is my dad's name is named after Joseph in the Bible.
Well,
My
that's
grand,
awesome.
yeah, my grandmother named him, and Stephen. He has two Bible names. So,
Yeah,
what was the
that's great.
spark that first inspired The Last Healer?
Well, the characters I think were largely inspired by my own experience being such close friends with my sister, and so I wanted to do a story about siblings. But specifically, what inspired the fantasy world is different elements of the struggles of following Christ, and that kind of springboards well off of what I was just saying. Because in this world, one of the biggest challenges I think of being a Christian is it's very difficult sometimes to share the gospel uncompromisingly, straightforwardly, with people that you are very close with, your friends and your family, because you're afraid of, what if I say something wrong and they end up further away from Jesus because of something I said? That's a very real fear. And I've wrestled with that many times in my life. And so the reason that I chose a story where there's this enemy empire that's oppressing them, which is kind of symbolic of the ways of the world, the system of Satan, if you will. And then one of them wants to pursue this lost healer that can bring freedom to the land and bring back their Christ figure, their king. But the other one wants to compromise and play it safe for the sake of, quick peace, quick in the now peace that doesn't take any risks. And Princess Kiva, who wants to find the healer, she has difficulty trying to convince her brother of that. She has difficulty trying to share the truth with her brother. And that's largely what the first episode is about, is she finds this amulet that acts like a compass that points to the healer. But there's like multiple times where she tries to tell her brother about it, but then he'll go on some political tangent about how, oh, he needs to appease the High King and he needs to really make sure that they stay in line. And much
Yeah.
like people in the real world, when we're trying to start conversations about Jesus, they'll get swept up with, this thing or that thing, things that in the grand scheme of eternity don't matter. But it can be difficult sometimes to talk to people and share Jesus with them when they're not even convinced that they need to be saved. And that's kind of where that struggle came from. And then throughout the series, there are different characters that reflect different stages of the faith journey. Another character would be Aaron, who's this young knight who actually is on the opposing side. He's one of the knights for the armies that have invaded them. But he sees Kiva's faith in action, and he begins to have his curiosity piqued, and he is driven to learn more about her faith. And that kind of reflects how, as Christians, when we live for Jesus and we actually consistently live out his teachings, people are going to take notice. Even if it's people that we never get a chance to interact with, they're going to take notice of that.
Yeah. So were there any particular passages or parables that served as anchor for the story?
Yes. In Matthew, of course, Jesus says, the one who seeks finds. And so that type of message of when you seek God, even against the flow of culture, even against the pressures of society, you will find him. And that's what Princess Kiva is doing. And so even though the Alkanites have tried to suppress any mention of the healer, she still is seeking and finding. So that's her journey. And then Aaron's character is what I call the seeking skeptic. He's someone who is not ready to commit himself to the faith, but he is curious about it and he wants to learn more. And I draw some inspiration from him from Mark chapter 12, where the teacher of the law asks Jesus about the greatest commandment. And then after Jesus answers him and the man says, "You've answered well," in Mark 12, verse 34, Jesus tells him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And I've always found that intriguing because there's a lot of people out there who are not consciously hostile to Christ's kingdom. They're just curious and they just need time to
Yeah.
really think about it and really wrestle with it internally. And obviously we need to show grace and patience to those people. And that's kind of where Aaron's character is born from, where he's not quite ready to commit himself, but he sees something unmistakable in Kiva's faith and he wants to know more. So that's kind of where his journey comes from.
Okay. So do you see yourself reflected in any of these characters?
That's a very good question because I think inevitably a little bit of me will bleed into any character I write. I don't know that there's any one character that has a direct correspondence to me where it's meant to be literally me inserted into the story. Prince Rian, though, I will say I strongly identify with his drive to protect his sister.
Yeah.
And because, like I said, he may be compromising with their invaders, but he's doing it with the best of intentions. And as an older brother myself, I strongly identify with that drive, and so it's very easy to write his dialogue and his personality in those scenes because that very much is like me.
Okay. So how do you make sure the story engages fantasy fans while also pointing toward spiritual truths?
Well, the aspects of a good fantasy storytelling, I think, are just first of all, you need a strong sense of good versus evil. I think fantasy really amplifies that. I think probably the most famous example would be the Lord of the Rings, and the good versus evil dynamic in that is very, very strong. There's no ambiguity over who's the hero, who's the villain, and I feel like that's actually been lost in a lot of modern cinema. They've kind of blurred the line between good and evil and said it's all this gray area and maybe it's just all a matter of opinion. But deep
Couldn't
down, we're all made in the image of God. Whether we believe in Jesus or not, we are made in God's image and there's no escaping that. So there's something in our being because we're made in his image that recognizes, no, some things are actually good and some things are actually evil. And fantasy, more than most genres, I think, can really tap into that. So you make your heroes easy to root for and you make your villains easy to fear. And that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is you can take struggles that are personal to you and real to you, and if you weave them into the story authentically, where your characters are making believable decisions based on their circumstances, that resonates with people because people resonate with authenticity. We don't resonate so much when characters do things out of character. We resonate with people who behave like real people would, and we feel like we can watch this character, appreciate them as a person, and learn and grow with them. And it gets to the point where we see them go into situations and we're like, oh, I know this character, so I bet they're going to react this way. We almost have fun treating them like a real person. And so that's, if you maintain that realism, I think that really engages people. And that also, again, just shows how much artistic thought and care you've put into the story. Because if the characters have come alive to you and they're based off of things that you have authentically struggled with, then that really connects with the viewer as well.
Okay, so what else do you think people will walk away with after experiencing the film?
So, first of all, I really want people to take away a sense of just enjoyment. I want people to care about the characters and really want to know what happens to them. But more than that, I want people to feel a sense of inspiration, like and their inner child has been awakened, and there's this adventure they're about to go on. I think a lot of us, we can relate to leaving a movie theater, especially as a kid, and just feeling this sense of awe, this indescribable awe, having been transported into this larger world that had kind of, for the moment, has made us forget the real world that we live in. And that is an echo of the image of God. I believe that we, as image bearers of God, we naturally long for something that's bigger than us, that's greater than us. We long for something like that to connect with for meaning and growth. And obviously that longing ultimately points to heaven and to God. But I think the goal of good storytelling is to take us beyond the quote unquote mundane real world that we live in, and train our minds to imagine and experience something higher. And by doing so, it activates the corner of our soul that is sensitive to the call of God and the longing for heaven. And so my hope is that by getting swept up in this inspirational story, with good and evil so apparently presented, that people will be drawn to think of God and think of heaven and ultimately seek him.
Okay, so where do you envision the series going from here? Multi-seasons, expanded world,
Yes,
companion
so
animals?
So currently the episode is going through its film festival circuit, and we're also doing a marketing campaign to
Yeah.
build an audience for it. Lord willing, I'm seeking an executive producer so we can get funding for a first season. I have plot outlines for future seasons as well, and still writing more episodes as we speak, actually, and very, very grateful for that. And I'm praying that God will bless it to be a multi-season show.
Okay. What advice do you give to other Christian creators who want to honor God with their gifts?
So the first thing, that's an awesome question, and there's so many different places I could go with it. I think the biggest thing I would say is never allow your work to become an idol, because Satan is so crafty. He will take something that is good and distort it. That's all he can do. By the way, Satan can't create. Satan can't make intrinsically evil things. He can only take good things that God has made and either remove them or break them somehow. So you might have what starts out as a good intention to honor God with your work, but the devil's very good at taking that intention and turning it into an idolatrous obsession. So make sure that you are not putting your work before God. You're not putting your writing, your creativity, however innocent it may seem, you're not putting that before pursuing your relationship with God. Make sure that your work is being consistently and consciously offered to God as an act of worship. That's the first thing. Second thing is to constantly be saturating your work in prayer. Be praying that God is glorified through it. Pray that God will make it clear to you if there's something he wants you or doesn't want you to put in your story, or some business pursuit he doesn't want you to take. Pray for his guidance, because God is real, he's personal, and he's not someone who just wants to sit at a distance and watch you struggle for him. He actually wants to be part of the things you do for his glory. So that would be my advice.
Okay. So if the last healer could leave one lasting mark on culture, what would you want it to be?
Honestly, I think it would be just the truth that absolute goodness exists and all the implications that come with that. And ultimately, I pray that just as Kiva seeks the healer, and then people are inspired by her journey, Christians would be inspired to live more consistently for their faith, and that would result in people being inspired to, like Aaron, see the truth at work and want to know more about it.
So if you could sit down with any storyteller from history, biblical or modern, who would it be and why?
Okay, I don't have to think twice about this one. C.S. Lewis. And the reason being is because not only was he a great storyteller, he was also just a great philosophical and theological thinker. And I've read so many of his books. I'm currently reading The Four Loves, and he had such a gift for not only articulating and understanding wisdom, but just packaging it in such a memorable, winsome manner that took deep points and made them simultaneously accessible, but also staggered you with how profound they were. And I'm very few writers have that gift, and I would just love to, yeah, just sit and have a chat with him.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on the current climate that's happening um, in the culture right now, like with Charlie Kirk and Trump and everything?
That is something that has really resonated personally with me because Charlie Kirk was only like 3 years older than me,
Yeah.
and one of the biggest things it drove home, and that I think God is using it to work ultimately good for our world, is the fact that we're not guaranteed tomorrow. You could be a young person, and think that you have decades of your life left. And oh, maybe if God exists, I'll get to him when I'm older and when it actually matters. No, it matters now. The Bible says today is the day of salvation. Don't wait. You might not have tomorrow. You might not have 5 minutes from now. And I was just so encouraged and blessed to see that at Charlie Kirk's memorial, they shared the gospel on national television. And it was heard by, who knows how many people. And it will continue being heard as people rewatch the clips. And that's ultimately what's going to save and heal our country. Yes, we do need Christians to be politically active and to vote and make policies in alignment with God's word. But ultimately, what we need is for people to be changed from the inside out. The law is not the means of salvation. You can make all the Bible-based rules you want. It's not going to save people's souls. What saves people's souls is the fact that God became a man, Jesus Christ. He lived the life we could never live. Then he died on the cross to take the punishment we deserve. And he rose from the dead, and we need to put our faith in him, not our own works. And I'm just so grateful that um, that out of this horrendous tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death, that message is being proclaimed more loudly and clearly than I think it has in a long time.
Uh, did you hear about anything on Three Eye Atlas?
I'm sorry, what? I'm not familiar with what that is, actually.
Yeah, they're saying it was an asteroid or comet, but more that they pay attention to it, they're saying it looks like it could be a metallic ship heading towards Earth by December 17th or something like that.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. That's intriguing.
Yeah, because some people was wondering if it's a biblical event that's going to happen. If you didn't hear about it, then if yeah, you'll have to look into it.
Well, whether that is a biblical event or not, then it's just yet another thing to make you think of the time is short. Christ said
Yeah,
that we're to be constantly watching for his return because you don't know the day or the hour.
yeah. So outside of filmmaking, what fuels your creativity and faith on a daily basis?
Well, I listen to a lot of different pastors and apologetics speakers, and like when I go on long drives, I like to listen to church services, and also enjoy working out. I think staying physically fit is also a great form of spiritual discipline as well. It prevents the fatigue from being a distraction. And honestly, I'm just very close with my family, and church attendance obviously keeps you spiritually close with the Lord and gives you a network of believers to draw strength from. And ultimately, just constant prayer. I mean, if you study the Gospels and the life of Christ, he is constantly going off into solitary locations and praying, and that's for our example, because Jesus, as God manifest in the flesh, needs to pray to the Father. How much more do we, who are not God, need to pray to the Father? And so Christ really sets a good example for us there. And I think that the lesson to draw from that is to constantly be in prayer and constantly be acknowledging that you need God and also be seeking his direction.
So, is there anything else you want people to know about Wilson Hickman?
Um, Not about me personally, but I will say that if you want to learn more about The Lost Healer and watch the episode, please go to our website, thelosthealer.com. I also encourage you to follow our socials. We're on Instagram and Facebook, and it's at The Lost Healer Series.
Okay. So, thanks for the interview.
You're welcome.